Hello, good day, and thank you for having me. I'm Veejay Villafranca, and I'm a full-time documentary photographer and a photojournalist. And also, I'm a lecturer for visual communications and visual literacy in the Asian Center for Journalism and also in the College of Saint Benilde. Today, I'll be briefly discussing one part of my lectures based from my personal experience as a news photographer in the Philippines. My presentation today is entitled A Field Guide to Visual Journalism. Before anything, just a brief background, I'll be focusing on one of the pillars of visual journalism, which is photojournalism. And I think this is one of the main sort of topics and the main disciplines that's being used in visual communications and also in the media industry today. So what is photojournalism? Photojournalism, as I mentioned, is a pillar in visual journalism. It's a particular form of journalism that employs images in order to tell a news story. It is now usually understood to refer only to still images, but in some cases, the term also refers to the video that is used in broadcast journalism. Photojournalism is distinguished from other close branches of photography like documentary photography, social documentary, street photography, celebrity photography, and even portrait photography. By complying with a rigid ethical framework that demands that the work be both honest and impartial whilst telling the story in strictly journalistic terms. And lastly, photojournalists create pictures that contribute to the news media and help communities connect with one another. Photojournalists must be well-informed and knowledgeable about events happening right outside their door. They deliver news in creative format that is not only informative, but also entertaining or engaging. And like a writer, a photojournalist is a reporter, but they must often make decisions instantly and carry photographic equipment, often while exposed to significant obstacles. So I highlighted this because in what we see around today, especially in online news and even social media posts, a lot of it is reliant also on visuals or in images. So photojournalism, to put it in context, fuses together two disciplines: photography, or visual communications, or visual journalism, and journalism, which is the gathering or putting together data in order to share information. So why photography? As a famous photographer said, a photograph is a story that I fail to put into words. And photography, I think, as I mentioned again, plays a very important role in today's communication platforms. And what is visual journalism? So visual journalism is a new term coined maybe in the last few years. Visual journalism is the combination of text, images, and layout or graphic design. Visual journalism is a much wider concept than photojournalism. It is essentially creating the overall visual appearance of a newspaper, magazine, TV channel, and so on. The visual appearance of a media channel, newspaper, or magazine is created with typography, photographs, video, illustrations, cartoons, maps, and infographics, and other graphical solutions. So visual journalism basically is an umbrella term that covers a lot of what the other platforms are doing today. From the original news platforms such as print, online, and the broadcast publications, this term visual journalism covers a broader scope. So what is the role of images in our society? Number one, images record history. Photographs can provide glimpses into lives past, long ago events, and forgotten places. They can help shape our understanding of culture and history and the identity of the people who appear in them. Number two is to inform. Photography is often perceived as an objective and therefore unbiased medium for documenting and preserving historic moments and national and world histories, and for visualizing and narrating news stories. And last is to foster dialogue. Presentations are communication tools that can be used as demonstrations. They can foster sympathy and raise awareness, or alternatively, offer critical commentary on historical people, places, and events. Throughout the history of the medium, photographers have aimed to capture the essence of events they witnessed, though the question of the trustworthiness of their images is always up for debate. Lectures, speeches, reports, and more. It is mostly presented before an audience. So as we practice our duties as visual communicators or as communicators, I think it is always important to have context on what we put out before we put anything out there. So for example, like I mentioned here and also from the past slides in this presentation, there's an emphasis on the images, on how important are images in our society and also in getting our message across. So here are just a few examples of them. Like I said, record history, inform, and lastly, to foster dialogue. most especially in the day of the social media platforms where audience engagement is already part and parcel of what we do. I think dialogue and fostering inclusive dialogue through the use of images is very important, and I think should be given more emphasis today. So what are the types of news photos? Number one, the very basic and classic way of approaching a news article or a news event is through a portrait. Portrait photography or portraiture is a type of photography aimed towards capturing the personality of a person or group of people by using effective lighting, backdrops, and poses. Number two, spot news. Spot news usually means a photo tied to a time-sensitive news or event based on the traditional news values such as timeliness. This is also called breaking news. So things that is happening, that is constantly in flux. So things that are happening outside right now, things that can happen in an instant that concerns a wider story or issue. Number three, daily life. Daily life is a visual depiction of current events and daily activities usually connected to a larger story such as economy, tourism, health, and other things. And number four, documentary. Documentary photography is a discipline of photography that provides a straightforward representation of people, places, objects, and events, and is often used in reportage. It's also similar to long-form journalism or long-form documentary, but it's only in print. Documentary photography or documentary work usually is a very classified type of news photography or photography because it needs a proper platform, such as in the traditional days, it used to be published in several pages in a magazine or in a newspaper. In today's digital platforms, it has more room in, for example, a proper website or a proper news article or column. So what makes a good photograph? Here are just a few tips on what makes a good photograph or an engaging photograph. Number one is composition. Very important and one of the basic pillars of photography, which is how you frame your subject or subjects and how you want to emphasize a specific detail from your subject. Number two is emotion. Emotion is quite tricky and it takes a little bit of practice to capture emotion, but usually a photograph that says something beyond what you physically see. For example, in my photograph, you can see several layers of details. In the photograph, a kid holding a balloon, a woman holding a balloon while on the mobile phone, and then you can see particularly the reactions of their faces. And then from there, maybe you can draw your personal conclusions on what the photo is about. And that's how you engage your audience through emotion. Number three is creativity. Creativity is very broad in other disciplines or creative disciplines. It is really up to how you practice your craft, in this instance in news photography or in photography, on how you can be creative with your images. So before you can even be creative with an image or with a photograph, I think it deals greatly with what you are required of. For example, what is the story assigned to you? What is the issue assigned to you? And at the same time, what are the other things that you need to cover before you can impart a certain level of creativity? And lastly is context. Very important, most especially in the field of news photography or visual journalism. Context is always, not always, but like most often given a low regard. But context is important because it is what engages your audience or what puts your audience in a level of discourse with regards to what you're trying to say or what's the story that you're trying to illustrate. Important traits. Number one, important traits of a visual journalist is, of course, journalism, as I mentioned earlier. Journalism is an important core value in pursuing news photography. And this is important because that is the part of your practice or of your profession that actually deals with the reportage or the reporting aspect or the communication aspect of your task or of your profession. Number two, ethics and integrity. The guiding pillars of visual representation and photojournalism. And not only in visual representation and photojournalism, but in general in news reporting or in reporting per se, ethics and integrity should always be given as a high regard. And number three is adaptable. Awareness of the changes in delivering news and information to the audience. This has been a particularly challenging trait, but I believe everyone has to sort of adapt to the fast changes that has happened in the field of communications, visual communications, and communications in general in the last couple of years. So you have to choose and you have to select the best particular platform for you to be able to communicate your message or your story effectively. And after that, here are a few more additional disciplines that's part and parcel actually of being a visual journalist. Number one is picture editing. Picture editing is not only just Photoshop or just toning your images, but also picture editing is a careful selection of photographs to match the assigned story. So picture editing is actually the careful selection of the image that will match the story assigned to you, or the selection of group of images that will illustrate a larger issue of a particular story or article that's going to be published in your publication or platform. Number two is research. Always keep your nose sharp for news. Be on the lookout for possible stories. Number three is pitching ideas. So for example, if you are a freelancer and you have story ideas that you want to get published, pitching ideas to news editors and news publications is always a must. Taking your ideas to the news editor for a possible assignment. And lastly, community engagement. Creating avenues for academic discussion regarding images and stories, for example, in exhibitions and also in social media sites. So community engagement usually is like an extra responsibility for visual journalists. Usually, once our main job is done, once the images or the stories or the news article has been published. But recently, in the last couple of years, community engagement has been also part of our responsibility. Also to clear, for example, the context of our report, the context of the images, the context of the video piece that we just published. And lastly, caption writing. So caption writing, specifically for photographs, is very important because it will lead the viewers to specific data or information for them to be able to draw up their own conclusions from the images or the multimedia pieces that's being shown to them. So nearly all AP captions follow a simple formula. AP is Associated Press, and it's one of the leading journalistic news wires in the world. They're also known for publishing style guides or quote-unquote style guides, which a lot of journalists or journalism institutions and even academic institutions follow. So, what do they say about captions? Number one, the first sentence of the caption describes what the photo shows in the present tense and states where and when the photo was made. Number two, second sentence of the caption gives background on the news event or describes why the photo is significant. And lastly, whenever possible, try to keep captions to no more than 2 concise sentences while including the relevant information. Try to anticipate what information a newspaper editor or reader will need. And if you want to know more about captioning, especially on the more detailed subjects, for example, there are different types of captioning. For example, if you're reporting for a health story, there are specific terms that they use, for example, for like government, institutions, or organizations and stuff like that. You can visit apstylebook.com to get more information. And that's it. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Otherwise, maraming salamat and yeah, thank you.